Widow Bowery's first letter, sent from the West Indies within 1763, was shortened to the point. I'm very well in health, but my dear son is not so. He has had a fever and has been ill ever since, and has lost all his strength. I have made an agreement with his brother for his portion and to send it by next ship. If he dies before that time, I hope you will have no objection to his portion being settled on my grandchildren and my children. His name is John Bowery, and his father's name was George Bowery. Jean was now 25 years old and the eldest child of the family. In spite of his mother's wish that he should marry a Bowery girl, it had always been understood that he was not to do so until his fortune was secured by the sale of the property at Newtown Square. It had been her own father's wish that John should take the name of Bowery. He had married the daughter of a Bowery and would be considered a Bowery himself, but he did not know this. He knew only that he was the eldest son and must now do something to support the family name. When the letter came from the West Indies, it was opened by his elder brother, Richard, and, in accordance with their joint will, the contents were handed over to John. Richard had died some years previously, leaving no direct heirs, but his widow, having no children of her own, had consented to the adoption of her late husband's brother as her heir. Richard had been a merchant of considerable substance, and, by the time he died, owned the property which his family had accumulated during generations of trade in the East Indies. He had always intended that his brother should have a share of his estate when he reached his majority, and he had told him so before he left England. The news of his brother's death reached John while he was still in the West Indies, but by the time the vessel returned home, his own condition was such that it seemed likely that he might not survive much longer. His illness was a slow fever which never left him for more than a few days, and during these brief intervals, he was conscious of nothing but pain. When at last he began to recover, he found that he was in great danger of dying. When he received his brother's letter, he was prostrated by the news, and his illness returned with redoubled strength. He lay in his cabin unable to move for 3 weeks. During that time, he did not see anyone but his steward, who had come from Newtown Square to look after him, and he could not even write a reply to the letter which had brought him so little comfort. He was therefore surprised when, after 6 days, he heard the voice of Richard Bowery at the cabin door. "Come in," he said. "What do you want?" "I came to tell you how sorry I am," he replied. "I am so sorry for your trouble. Your mother was a good woman, and I am sure she is happy in heaven." "I don't think so," John replied. "I think she is in a better place than that." "It is God's will," his visitor continued, "and we must submit." "I'm not afraid," John replied, "and I am glad to see you." His visitor entered the cabin, walked to the bed, and knelt beside it. "I have come to tell you how sorry I am to hear about your illness," he said. "You were always the favorite of my dear mother. I always hoped that you might marry one of our family, but I know you will not want me to force you into any marriage that does not please yourself." "I think you should wait until I am better," John replied. "You are so kind to me now that I will not be offended if you say no more." "That's very noble of you," Richard answered, "but you must promise to allow me to visit you again. You cannot imagine what a comfort it is to me to be able to pray for you. I know that your mother will listen to my prayers for you." "You were very good to me," John replied, "and I will write to you again when I am stronger." When Richard had left him, John sent for his steward and gave him orders to make arrangements for his marriage as soon as possible. He was still weak when he sent his commands, and it was nearly another month before he was strong enough to go on deck. He then went to his cabin and found that Richard had returned with his answer. He was seated near the table with a sheet of paper in front of him on which were written the words, "John Bowery is free to marry whomever he chooses." John read the note twice and then returned to his cabin. He lay down and thought about the strange turn which fortune had taken. He did not think it would be right to marry without his mother's consent, but his brother's visit had shown him how fond she was of him, and he decided to write to her at once and ask her advice. He therefore took pen and paper and wrote a long letter in which he described his feelings towards Miss Peggy Garland, his conversation with Richard Bowery, and the strange note which he had received. He did not give a description of Peggy, but he said that she was very young and quite unaccustomed to the manners of gentlemen. He then told his mother all that had happened and asked her permission to marry her granddaughter. He enclosed the letter with those words in it and asked her to send an answer by Richard Bowery. He then waited with the utmost impatience for an answer. The next morning it arrived. It was very short. John Bowery is free to marry whomever he chooses. He was overjoyed at receiving such an answer, for he had no doubt that his mother's reply meant just what it said, that he was free to marry anyone he chose. He felt sure that she would not wish him to marry unless he were really in love with the girl, and now, thanks to Richard's kindness, he knew that he was. His joy at having got this news was great, but when he thought about the manner in which his letter had been delivered, he felt angry at first. It was only after considering it for some time that he decided that it could only have been meant kindly. The idea of writing the whole story out in detail seemed strange and unnecessary, and yet it would be difficult to do without it. A few days later the ship put in at New York, and 2 days later than that, John saw Peggy for the first time. She was as beautiful as he had expected her to be, and her beauty had made a greater impression upon him than it had done on his brother. She was more beautiful even than he had imagined her. He thought that she was about 16 years old, but Richard said that she was younger. On landing at New York, John sent for Richard Bowery and told him of their approaching marriage. He said nothing of Peggy's age or of her lack of experience in matters of gallantry. He did not wish his brother to think that he was doing anything that might give him offense or that might make it seem that John was marrying a servant. Richard was delighted at hearing of the marriage, but he did not like to speak about Peggy because he thought that John might not like it. However, he asked John whether he would like to take her out for a drive in the park. "I should love to do that," John answered. "But, of course, I should take her under my mother's wing and look after her as if she were a child." They drove to the park in one of the Bowery carriages and rode there for more than 3 hours. Peggy was enchanted with the whole thing, with the coachman's livery, which John wore, with the coach, with the horses, with everything. When they had gone through the park and returned to the house where they were staying, John took her upstairs to a little bedroom in which were many pretty things that had been brought from New York, and there they sat down to chat for a while before going downstairs. Peggy looked round with a smile and then said, "Oh, how lovely! 'Tis just like a picture of the Madonna." John laughed at the word and then went on with his explanations of what each piece of furniture was meant for. She sat looking at them all in a rapture of admiration and thought it delightful that everything should be so beautiful and yet so simple. John's sister came into the room just as they were about to go downstairs, but Peggy was so charmed with all that she saw that she forgot to say goodbye to her hostess. They left New York a week later and arrived at Newtown Square soon after nightfall. The house was lit up, and there were many people standing in the hall and on the steps outside who came to wish them welcome. They were all in high spirits, for they were going to have a dance in honor of their arrival, and this was something new for Miss Peggy, who was very much impressed by the sight of so many well-dressed men and women waiting for them at the door. The moment she entered the house, she ran up to her grandmother and kissed her. Then she turned to John and said, "Oh, how lovely!" Her words were so true that John could not find a reply for a moment. He felt that he ought to have been wearing fine clothes and a powdered wig, that he was a fine gentleman instead of a plain country parson, and he knew that if Miss Peggy saw him as he was, instead of as what he wished himself to be, she would never think of him again. As soon as she recovered from her surprise, she said, "How nice your house is." "It is better than nice," John replied. "It is charming." "And you are so good-looking," she continued. "You flatter me," said John. "No," she said, "it isn't flattery. I mean every word of it." He was very much pleased by the compliment and could think of nothing better than asking her to dance. They went into the ballroom, which was decorated with flowers and ribbons, and then began what John called a glorious dance, for everyone did what he wished them to do, and what he himself would have wished them to do if he had been in their place. As they danced, he found that Peggy's figure was perfect, and as he led her round and round the room, they became better acquainted and more friendly to one another. She was a very frank young girl and talked to him about herself as freely as if she had been a man. He was delighted when his partner asked him to come home with her for a while before they left, and they went off arm in arm in a carriage which he had sent for her from New York. They drove through the streets for several miles, laughing and talking gaily together. He had asked her how long she had been in the country, but she did not answer until after they had stopped for a moment at her door and he had helped her out of the carriage. Then she said, "Oh, I have not been here long at all. I have come from New York with my Uncle Benjamin. We have been here ever since we left Philadelphia, but now I am going back again." John felt that she was speaking to him as an old friend, as someone who knew everything about her, and this made him feel proud and happy. It was only a few minutes later that they reached his house in Newtown Square. He walked up the steps arm in arm, and then, just as he had helped her out of her cloak, Miss Peggy said, "I am so sorry, but I cannot marry you now, for I have promised to marry my cousin Benjamin." John felt very disappointed and could not help showing it, but Miss Peggy was so good-natured that she did not seem to mind. She only said, "It can't be helped, I'm afraid. I'm afraid we must be friends still." "I would rather be friends with you than anyone else," he answered. And then, when she had left him at the foot of his steps, he stood gazing up at her window until she opened it and looked out upon him. The next morning when he went down to breakfast, he found that Miss Peggy had already gone off with her Uncle Benjamin.